It's defining your own success. And for me, that, to be honest, we didn't talk about this, but that was actually a big deal for me because I had a different idea of what success was supposed to look like. I was a journalist. I wanted to go work for the New York Times, or I wanted to write for National Geographic. And that's what you did. If you're a journalist, this is the vision of success. And there was a moment where I had stepped off that and had to redefine, but that isn't what I want. That's not what success looks like for me. And I was the kind of that kid in school who was wanted A's in every class and, extra credit. And, so for me, choosing to not go for the extra credit was like a big, a big mental shift for me to be like, oh, it's not about being an editor at the New York Times. It's about buying a farm. And that was not an easy shift for me.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast, where we are reimagining and redefining what it means to be in midlife, where we are gathering energy, momentum, and excitement for our next chapter via candid conversations with other midlifers about their own pivots, pitfalls, and triumphs. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. Have you ever done something that made no sense on the surface? That might have seemed a little crazy to other people, but you decided to do it anyway because you felt absolutely compelled to do it? In her 40s, Julie Carrick Dalton and her husband bought a tract of forest next to her family's land in New Hampshire that was in danger of being timbered and developed. She built a small organic farm from scratch while learning how to farm and managed to preserve 92 acres of forest, all while writing her first novel and raising 4 young kids. She acknowledges it's been a bumpy journey, but well worth facing the hard work, mistakes, and rejections along the way. And she's a firm believer that there's a lot of sunshine on the other side of 50. At 51, she finally found her stride. Her debut novel, Waiting for the Night, just launched in January as a most anticipated 2021 book from CNN, USA Today, Parade, Newsweek, and BuzzFeed, and was an Amazon Best Book of the Month. I'm so excited for you to meet her. Here's Julie Carrick Dalton. Let's go. Hey, Julie, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, I'm so excited to talk to you. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. I love that when you sent me an email letting me know what was going on for you and about your new book and everything else, I instantly was knew that I wanted to talk to you right away. So I'm so glad this is our second chat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. I'm just going to have you take over for a second and take us back to, there's so much with the farming and the book and everything. I'm going to let you kind of go back and pick your starting point for where you feel like your pivot happened, or where you felt the need to jump in and do what you're doing, which is enormous.
Yeah. So it sounds like they don't go together, farming and writing a novel, but they really do. And so for me, I'm a mom of 4 kids. And so I was a journalist for a long time. And then after I had my 3rd child, I was like, well, maybe I need to stay home for a little bit because the daycare costs and everything. So I was home for a long time, and I started dabbling in fiction and, growing things in pots outside. And as my kids got older, I started really feeling this pull that there was more out there for me to be doing. And as my kids got older, when I was in my 40s, I made this crazy leap because there was a piece of land that was on the market near our home. It was a pristine, beautiful forest, and it was on the market for timber and development. And they were marching through the forest and clear cutting it. And it was just devastating because we had deer and moose and bear that would walk into our yard. And so I couldn't stand it. So my husband and I just took this crazy leap, and we bought the land so that the moose wouldn't be homeless, basically. Yeah. And so we built a farm on it because we needed a business reason to own this piece of property, or else that would make no financial sense. So I had to learn how to be a farmer. I studied how to build a barn. Spent a year studying barn architecture. So we built this farm. And at the same time, my kids are getting older. I'm getting a little bit more autonomy, that they were moving into, older grades in high school, and I have college graduates now. And so I started writing a book, and as the book took place in New Hampshire, where my farm is, and they kind of became one thing for me. I was writing the book, I was doing agricultural research, I was digging, moving, hauling rocks out of my field, and then going home and studying those rocks to find out more about them. And it all became one story. So my novel, it's called Waiting for the Night Song. It's set in rural New Hampshire in the mountains and lakes and forests in New England. And it takes place against the backdrop of climate change, because as I was building my farm, I started observing phenomenon in my growing region that made me stop and think about what was going on in this quiet corner of New Hampshire, because I don't think anybody thinks like, oh, New Hampshire, that's the epicenter of climate change. We don't think about
right.
that.
What were you seeing specifically? Like what was coming up that you were noticing?
Well, so it started that in the lake, we have all these invasive species of plants and that are choking out native species. And in the forest, there are these trees and these invasive trees that have moved into the forest and are choking out other trees. And suddenly I was the steward of a 100-acre forest. So I needed to get to know my forest. So I'm observing these things. And I saw this map of maple trees, and my forest is gorgeous. It is like stunning. It has all these, beautiful sugar maples, those iconic trees you see on postcards. And the map of where maple trees exist is moving north. Like the bottom edge of the habitat for maple trees is moving towards Canada. And all of a sudden I had this panic, like, my maple trees could be gone in 50 years from my growing region. So I did a deep dive into what other things are endangered and what other invasive species are moving in. And that cracked open this whole trove of research. And it really shaped my novel by understanding how the ecology in my growing area was shifting. So this is a complete ignoramus question, but where do the invasive species come from? They're brought in from somewhere, I'm going to assume. Well, that's a really good question, because there's not one answer to it. So a lot of the invasive species in lakes come from other boats. If you are in a boat in one lake and you bring your boat and you have some, plants that are wrapped around the prop of your boat, you put it in another lake and they spread, it can come like that. Wow. It can also be species that you are encouraged by over fertilizing of agricultural land, or just people's yards. All the runoff of these nitrogen-based fertilizers into the water creates algae blooms and can make up. So it can really, things that we're doing are shifting our environment. But in my book, it's based on this beetle. It's called the mountain pine bark beetle, which is a very real beetle that has devastated forests in Colorado and California and led to a lot of these huge forest fires we're seeing. So in my book, I set the stage for this beetle to move to New Hampshire, which it does not exist in New Hampshire yet, but it is moving east across North America. Mm-hmm. It moves on wind events. They call them big wind events, where literally the beetles move on the wind. Mm-hmm. They look for drought. They thrive in a drought. And so when land is dry and we're getting warmer and we're experiencing more droughts in different places in the country. So these invasive species are moving because there's encouraging places like you and me, we want to live in a community that feels comfortable to raise a family. That's how invasive species are. They're just looking for a great place to settle down and have some babies and find enough food to eat. And that's where invasive species come from. Wow.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. We had a drought. I mean, I live in Connecticut, Western Connecticut, and we had a drought last summer, which is unusual for us. I mean, our reservoir was super low. So things are happening, right? So you were a journalist before, and then you're a mom, and to 4 kids. I mean, that's going to keep you busy. Yeah. How old were you when you decided to buy this tract of land?
I was in my 40s, and I'm going to guess it was about 44 maybe.
And how old were the kids?
So my kids right now, we can backtrack. My youngest is 16 and my oldest is 28. Wow. And so they were kind of spanning preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school all at the same time. Wow. When I built the farm.
You're taking on learning how to do organic farming in the middle of, you had to some young kids.
I did. Yeah. So I think my son was in preschool when we bought the farm, and he's 16 now.
Wow.
So it was this is also a cautionary tale. I'm not suggesting everyone go out and buy a farm and write a book, change careers into their 40s while they're raising 4 young children. But it did work out okay. It was and it wasn't really a conscious decision. It just seemed like this is what needed to happen. And it was more because the land was threatened than because I wanted to become a farmer. It was like it was an accidental entry into agriculture for me, because I felt the only way to save the land was if I had a fiscally responsible reason to buy it, which meant I needed a business on it. Yeah. And the only business I could come up with was a farm.
Wow. So, and had you ever thought about farming before this? Was this like was there a germ of this idea in your head before?
Not really. I've always loved growing things. My mom laughs because we used to live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in a high-rise apartment with a little balcony. And I used to try to grow corn on my balcony one year, which is a ridiculous proposition. But I've always been trying to grow things and, having things in containers in my yard. But I do have farming in my blood a little bit. My grandparents owned a farm, and I spent summers there in Western Maryland. And I have, wonderful memories of planting and harvesting things with my grandfather and eating food, being so proud of the dinner that I pulled out of the ground that afternoon with my grandfather. So it's something that I could visualize, and it didn't seem like a foreign concept to me, but I had no experience. And, spending a summer on your grandparents' farm, picking potatoes is not agriculture. That is not right. It was it maybe, whet my appetite for like appreciating it, but I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing to me though, what comes back around from our childhoods, those seeds that are there that we don't even realize that they're in us,
Yeah.
And then given the right circumstances, there it is ready to come out.
Yeah. It's something that always, it felt very, all the memories of being on their farm were beautiful memories to me. And it was a seriously rustic farm. And we did not have hot running water. And we didn't even have a shower or a bathtub. We used to have to heat water in a galvanized tub to take a bath. And it had the water for the house came directly out of a creek in the backyard, just straight into the house. And the only heat,
that was cold.
It was ice cold. And it had, we had the only heat was from a wood stove. So it was spending summers on that farm was definitely a different experience in my farm, which is, much more of a business type farm. Mm-hmm. But it made me love, working in the land and being outside.
Yeah. And your grandparents were there year round, I assume.
They were not there year round. My grandmother was an elementary school principal, and they went back and forth. It's actually very ironic because, I go back and forth to my farm. So I live in Boston, but my farm's in New Hampshire is about 2 hours away. Wow. And we had a family place in New Hampshire that our family has spent time there for a long time. And that's the forest that was threatened. And so I go back and forth between my farm and my house in Boston. Oh. But I live there full time and during growing season. Yeah. And I have a business partner who manages things when I'm not there full time. And it's only 2 hours away. So it's not that big of a deal to move around, but it is kind of exactly what my grandparents did, which
interesting.
And I never set out to do that, but it just sort of happened. And my book is dedicated to my grandmother, the one who owned that farm. I dedicated my book to her because she was such an inspiration to me.
Wow. Isn't that incredible? I have to tell you, when I started doing photography for the first time, it literally came out of nowhere. I never had thought I would ever be a professional photographer, but my grandfather was a hobbyist photographer, but to the point where he had his own darkroom. My uncle would experiment with pinhole photography. One of my aunts would also do photography. So it was there,
It creeps in, yeah.
Yeah. And it just was never something I considered until the time was right for me, I guess. It's so interesting the way those things pop up. And hopefully we listen to those little calls and step into it.
And I think as a parent, for me, it was, like I said, it wasn't necessarily a logical or smart thing to do at that moment in my life, being in my mid-40s with all these kids crawling all over me. But it was the thing I needed to do then. But in hindsight, I think it was a really good parenting move, because that and the book, both of them, because as I said, I was doing them simultaneously. And, I can say, oh, yes, I'm a published novelist now. And yes, I have a farm that's, operating now. But it was a really hard transition. Both. I got a lot of rejections for the book before I found a publisher. And, it was difficult. It took me 13 years to write the book, because I was raising all these kids, building a farm, trying to, just keep my head above water. And the farm, took many years to build and, get it operational. And I messed up so many times. And my kids were there the whole time. Like, they saw me get rejection letters and be devastated and heartbroken, and then go right back out and send another one out.
What a great lesson for them to watch that, to watch you try and try again.
Yeah, because it was absolutely not an easy journey. I know a lot of writers talk about their journeys, about how hard it is. And it takes so much, it's not even self-confidence that the reason you keep going. It's just a compulsion. It's like a passion that there's no option to give up on this book, because I loved it. And I put so much of my heart into it, and I believed in the book. So, and same with the farm. It was just moving forward by inches, not by feet or miles. I was creeping towards these goals. And I think my kids, they have an example of get back up, when you fall over, when and when somebody says no to you, just try another door. And in the book, so it came out in January, Waiting for the Night Song. And after all those years of struggling and rejection, it came out, and it was CNN, Newsweek, Parade, and USA Today all put it on their most anticipated book of the year list, which was like a shock.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Right?
And then it got covered in Entertainment Weekly and the Chicago Review of Books. And it's been this crazy journey, because this was the book that I couldn't sell.
That's amazing.
And here we are.
Wow. So going back to before you wrote the book, did you always feel like you had a novel in you? Was that always something that you were like, someday I'm going to do that?
Yeah, I think there's always been this tug between science and writing for me. And I can say that now, looking back on my life, I didn't recognize it when I was younger. But so I went to college as a biochemistry major, but I graduated as a journalism major. And it was a hard decision for me, because I loved both of them, but I love storytelling. And I love science. And it took me my whole life to figure out I can be a storyteller who writes about science. It took me a long time to figure that out. But I always wrote stories. I used to, the setting of my book is, takes place a lot in the woods. It starts with these little girls playing in the woods, imaginary games, imagining adventure, and just being silly and creative and mischievous. And that was me as a child. But what I was doing as a kid is I was a very nerdy little girl, and I used to write fan fiction for the Mork and Mindy TV show and Wonder Woman.
God, I loved Mork and Mindy. Oh my gosh. I feel like we're soul sisters.
And Charlie's Angels. Oh my gosh. I used to write these scripts, and my friends and I would act them out. So there's always stories.
Me too. Can I tell you, this is hilarious. Okay. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I can't even believe I'm going to say this out loud. I was total nerd geek girl too. Love Charlie's Angels. Yep. Also, Grease, the movie Grease at the time.
Oh yeah, I could recite every word.
Unbelievable. And about that time, I think I was like 6th grade, something like that. I was living on roller skates at that point in my life. Like, if I was not in school and I was up and down the street on roller skates, or in our friend's garage, if her parents' cars weren't in there, we would go into her garage. We would turn down the lights.
Oh yeah, it's like your own roller rink.
Turn it into like a disco, right? And
we did the same thing.
And we would listen to Grease, and the three of us, yes. And we started a club called Grease Angels.
Oh my gosh.
I was Kelly, and one of the other girls was Sabrina. And
I was Sabrina. I was always Sabrina. That's so funny. Oh my gosh, I think we would have been besties.
And I was also a card carrying Star Wars fan. So these are things my brother will never let me live down anyway. So I may as well just let everybody know about it.
Yes, I know. I hear you. I was right there with you on the roller skates. We used to make up routines on our roller skates to songs from Grease and Saturday Night Fever and Xanadu and all those funny.
Hilarious. My husband and I were just talking about Xanadu like 2 days ago. Some song came on and I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is from Xanadu.
Yes, I was in the dentist's office the other day and it came on and I was waiting for the dentist. I was texting my cousin. I'm like, I'm in the dentist chair and they're playing Xanadu. But yeah, it just takes you right back.
It does.
Yes. We're definitely dating ourselves exactly where we are in time by that.
So we've completely digressed. I'm sorry. I've taken us down some path. I don't know.
But we were talking about stories and how like I was always writing them. I was always telling my mother used to run a puppet theater when I was a kid. And she wrote all the scripts for the theater. And on weekends I used to go around with her as an assistant and her to like help her with the puppets and behind the scene and like hand out candy to the kids after the show and stuff like that. And so my first publishing credit was I wrote a puppet show when I was 10 that was produced.
Fantastic.
There's always been stories, but I didn't know it was going to be my career path. Initially, I thought I was going to go into science. And so I did sort of eventually, now that I'm in agriculture, I had to go back to school. I went back to Tufts and got a certificate in sustainable agriculture because I didn't know what I was doing. It was mostly because I wanted to learn about soil science and organic pest management. So it has come full circle. Like it was the stories and it was the science and it was journalism and now it's science and fiction and all those things kind of all, it just I needed to mature a little bit to understand how they all were going to come together in my life.
How it all rolls together. I am such a fan. So this is the thing. I was never good at science in school. I'm like when it comes to the technical part of following the scientific method, I am not your girl, right? But I have discovered as an adult that I absolutely love to read about science, to listen to like Science Fridays on NPR. And
yes, I love that.
One of my favorite podcasts is by Michelle Thaller from NASA. It's called Orbital Paths. And it's just, thinking about this universe that we live in and all the experiments that are going on in NASA. It's not in production anymore, but it got me through this year.
Yeah.
Just being able to think on that bigger scale of what life means, And
I think that fiction, it presents this opportunity to share stories that people might, including stories about science, just like the podcast, it's storytelling.
Yeah.
I think it's been, at least in my experience, it can be an invitation to people to engage with science if they're not scientists, if they don't consider themselves a scientist, because my book, it engages a lot of, agricultural and climate change themes in the background, but it's a story about friendship. It's a story about two women and a complicated friendship and, secrets and, some really difficult things. But it also engages climate, but people come to it for the story. They come to it because it's a suspense novel. It's a story of friendship between two women. And then the other stuff's in the background. And I did have this one moment about a month after my book was published that I got a review written. And, reviews can go one of two ways, that you can tell when you start reading it if it's going to be a good one or a bad one. And the reviewer started the review saying, I'm really not interested in climate change. I'm not interested in climate science. It's not affecting me. I don't really pay attention to the news. So I was bracing for this really scathing review because I felt like this isn't going to resonate with this reader. And she went on and said, but I loved the characters. I loved this story and I loved the plot. By the end of the book, I cared about the characters. So I cared about what they cared about. And now I think differently about climate change.
Wow.
And I was just like, that is really
that's got to be the best review you've ever got.
It is. She only gave me 4 stars, but it's still my favorite review. but it was, to me, it was like this evidence that, when you read a novel, you're putting your worldview aside for 10 hours or however long it takes to read a book. And you're choosing to enter the world through somebody else's viewpoint and see the world through their eyes. And that's a real act of empathy, to give up your worldview to take on someone else's. And then if you see their pain, their grief, their joys, they sort of become part of you a little bit. Like you are, secondhand experiencing their emotions and they leave an imprint on you. And when you put the book down, those memories stick with you, even if the story doesn't a little bit. Yeah. This idea that, so maybe climate change isn't affecting me today. I am a privileged North American living in a community where I have water, food, relative security. I'm not threatened by a hurricane today or a drought, but other people are. Mm-hmm. And so if you aren't feeling the effects of climate change and you're reading about someone else who is, it humanizes that it is happening, and it's generally happening first and worst to communities of color, Black and brown communities and indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. And from where I sit in New England, it's I'm pretty protected and quite privileged to not be experiencing it. But when you read someone else's experience, you recognize the humanity in it. So I think fiction
is those mirror neurons that are kicking into gear, right? It's why I love story. It allows us to connect with other people in a way. And then, like you said, you stay connected. That doesn't go away. That those mirror neurons, once they're gone off and you've got that emotional connection to something, that empathy is,
Because sometimes when you read a book, years later, you can remember, did I like the book? Did I have a good feeling about the book? But you might not remember all the details of what happened.
Oh, I never remember the emotional,
the emotional imprint will stick with you, or at least that's the hope. That's my goal. I hope it does. But it's like a Trojan horse, you can sneak in ideas in fiction. And people can read it just for the story, which is great. If you want a suspense novel, read my book. This is a great thriller. It's a great story about friendship. And it's a lot of nature imagery. It's very tactile, sensory, detail heavy book. And which I love reading those kind of books. So you can enjoy it for all those things. And you could also maybe be moved by some of the science in the book. But if you're not, that's okay too, because it's really for primarily a book always has to be a story.
Yeah.
Or else nobody's going to read it.
I mean, we were talking about this whole idea before we hit the record button. And I told you I was just listening to the audio version of the Parable, by Octavia Butler, The Sower. And man, what amazing, because the book was written in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it's set in basically now. I think it may start in 2025 or 2024 and goes up through 2027. And what she's seeing, I mean, it's viable. Yeah, the way she's written it, that things could go down this way. We just may be off by maybe 10, 15 years, 20 years. I don't know. But it's this whole kind of a post-apocalyptic, right? And but climate change is definitely, so hugely part of that story.
It is. And this whole genre of climate fiction, I think, she's one of the first people who was writing about climate in fiction. And then, Margaret Atwood too. I mean, we always think of The Handmaid's Tale as her, but she wrote her other books, the Mad Adam trilogy and Oryx and Crake. And these books are very climate focused, and they were before, we're talking about it more, it's in the media more, it's in the news more, but people were writing about it. But now, oh my gosh, there are so many fiction writers who are engaging climate change in their books. Some of them are like these apocalyptic, dystopian, or, science fiction books. And some of them are like mine. They're like a very contemporary, very realistic look at climate change as it's already happening. There's also romance novels that are coming out that are like the characters, climate scientists, or that it's just like showing up everywhere because how do we live in this world and not talk about climate? It's at some level.
It's great because, you think about climate change and it's like when you think about the budget and you're thinking suddenly in trillions of dollars, or you're thinking about climate change and it just, for us, it's a thing out there. It's not for those of us who are privileged and living where we're living, it isn't in our face.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to connect. It's hard to wrap our heads around the reality of it. But to suddenly have a story where you're connected to people, what a powerful way to involve people.
And one of the things I tried to do with my book, it's called Waiting for the Night Song. And night song references a songbird in the forest in New Hampshire. And it's a very real bird. It's called the Bicknell's thrush. And it's endangered. We're losing this bird. And the reason we're losing it is because of deforestation and hurricanes in the Caribbean. Because this little bird migrates to the Caribbean every winter and its habitat's being destroyed. So every year it comes back in smaller and smaller numbers. And I used this idea in my book that I said it's a 2 timeline story. My character, my main character's name is Katie Kessler, and we get her point of view as an 11-year-old, as an adult, and the chapters go back and forth. And when she's an 11-year-old and she lives in this little house in the woods with her parents, and she hears this bird, this songbird, and she recognizes it and loves this little bird. It's a teeny tiny gray bird that you would not notice. It's just this little bird. You'd fly by you and you wouldn't even notice it. But she loves this bird. So she comes back decades later to kind of face up to this past mistake she made when she was 11. And the woods are different and the bird's not there. It's not extinct. It's just not prevalent in the forest. So the waiting for the night song is a sense of longing and nostalgia for what we're losing in the forest. And this recognition that we are connected to the Caribbean. And, this little songbird that's dying in the Caribbean and not coming back to New Hampshire is leaving a hole in my ecosystem where my farm is. And it might not be obvious. It's not a bear. It's not a moose. It's not something we're going to see, like, where are the moose? It's little tiny gray bird, but it has a role in the ecosystem. And every time we lose something, everything else shifts just a little bit. Maybe something else comes in. And this little bird has a particular talent for helping a forest recover after a forest fire. And so when you lose something, even something tiny like an insect or a species of like a fungus, or you don't know what the bigger impact is of losing even just tiny little things. So in my book, I did a lot of work trying to connect New England to other parts of the world, because one action we take here could have a big impact somewhere else, and we don't know about it. Just like we might not think logically that a hurricane in the Caribbean is going to have an impact on my farm in New Hampshire. So I was trying to, draw some lines that we're kind of all in this together.
It's amazing. We don't know what we don't know,
Yes. Yeah.
We don't know what we don't know, but
yes, exactly.
Right. It's, and we never know we just don't know the impact we're having, and in more ways than one. It's amazing. So I'm just curious, is there anything that you wish you had known when you started down your path?
Wow. I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm glad I'm where I am right now. And if anything had been different, would I have landed here? If I hadn't fallen down all those times, and if I hadn't been rejected, or if I hadn't screwed up that corn crop, I wouldn't have learned for the next season. So, I guess somebody could have told me all that stuff in the beginning, but I'm so proud of my book, in part because I fought like heck to get there. I didn't have one of those stories where I sent it out and 15 publishers were bidding on it. I scrapped to get this publishing deal, and I worked so hard. And same with the farm. The farm is different in that you can't revise nature. You get what you get and you work with it, and you make better choices, or you make better decisions. But I think I had to learn all those things. So maybe I would like to know it was going to be okay, because there were definitely days I didn't. But I guess the thing is, trust your passion. That's what I would say to people is believe in your own passion and the reason that you're doing something. Because for me, there was a day when I went walking in the woods on my farm before I bought it, when I was like, is this crazy? Like, is this a crazy? Yes, it was crazy. The answer was yes. But I was looking at this forest, and it was beautiful. It's like in August, and everything was so green, and the birds were, everywhere. And the idea that forest might not exist if I didn't do something exactly right then made it all the reason to do it. And then to just trust that was going to be okay, which there were a lot of days it didn't feel like it was. But so I don't know. I don't know if I'd change anything, except that I would maybe just reinforce that, just trust your own passion and follow it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. It's kind of like, it's that stepping into something, even though it is crazy, even though you can see, and anybody around you is going to be like, that's crazy.
People still say that to me.
What are you doing? But if it won't leave you alone, then you have to honor that and step into the crazy.
Yeah.
And see where it takes you.
And I have about 2 miles of trails in my woods, and we've opened them up to the state. I own them; they're fully mine, but I allow the state to operate them like a state park, so anybody can come walk in those woods and see those trees and birds. And not near we have a barn with horses, and where I plant the vegetables, they can't go there. But it's a big property, so there's lots of trails. But I feel like everybody can go into those woods where I had that moment. And when I walk, I see moose print and bear tracks all the time. And every time I do, I'm like, I won,
Yeah.
That was the whole point. That was like, it wasn't ever about the corn. It was about the moose tracks.
Right. So that connects you to what was driving you the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not about the corn. Oh my God. I love that. It's not about the corn.
And I do love my corn. Don't get me wrong, but
right. But you know what? It's like when we step into doing something, I think so often, if we substitute corn for money, let's say, in that phrase, it's not about the money, or, but it's like what we place value on, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you define success? I'm constantly looking at that for myself. Like, am I tying it to my net worth, or am I tying it to what I'm able to do on a day-to-day basis? And am I excited about getting up in the morning?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that I agree with you, because my business model isn't brilliant. It's just barely hanging on, but it's surviving. But for me, if you ask me, it's thriving because it exists. Mm-hmm. And because it's still there. So yeah, it's defining your own success. And for me, that, to be honest, we didn't talk about this, but that was actually a big deal for me, because I had a different idea of what success was supposed to look like. I was a journalist. I wanted to go work for the New York Times, or I wanted to write for National Geographic. And that's what you did. If you're a journalist, this is the vision of success. Mm-hmm. And there was a moment where I had stepped off that and had to redefine, but that isn't what I want. That's not what success looks like for me. And I was the kind of that kid in school who was like, wanted A's in every class and, extra credit. And, so for me, choosing to not go for the extra credit was like a big mental shift for me, to be like, oh, it's not about being an editor at the New York Times. It's about like buying a farm. And that was not an easy shift for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. It's about honoring what was inside, what was, like you said, honoring your passion. Just, boy. And you have to take the time to even tap into what that is. Sometimes you don't even know.
Or you don't listen, or you don't want to see it. And, there's still days this seems like a ridiculous thing to me. Like, what am I doing? When I go, it's there, I mess things up all the time on the farm, and I'm learning, and it's been less than 10 years that I've been farming. And so I am learning, but some days I just get, I get frustrated. So it isn't like it's all rainbows and happy days. The way I'm making it sound is hard. It's really hard, but yeah, it's mine.
Yeah. And the moose tracks are there.
The moose tracks are always there. And we have bears that still come to the yard. And those bears where my house is they come through that forest. They would not come there if that forest had been clear cut. Yeah. And if there was a strip mall there, there would be no bears.
Yeah. You won.
I won.
Oh my gosh. I'm just so inspired by that. So what's coming up that you're excited about? Anything?
Yeah, so I'm working on a second book, and this one will not take 13 years because I have a contract. So I can't take 13 years.
It's so good to have a deadline, isn't it?
It is. Yes, the journalist in me. The journalist in me does thrive on deadlines, so this is a good thing. But yeah, so it's going to come out in sometime between January and March of 2023, and it's called The Last Beekeeper. And it's, again, a novel with climate elements. And I also am a beekeeper. We didn't talk about that, but
no, we didn't.
So I've lost many colonies of bees that have died to colony collapse disorder, which inspired this book. And it's set in the very near future. So it's not a crazy looking future. There's no like flying hoverboards and weird technology. And I don't put a date on it. It's just like a little bit in the future. So I don't put a year on it, but I introduce an event that hastens the collapse of our pollinators in a way, like we're all talking about it now, like, oh, save the bees, and the bees are dying. I create a thing that makes it happen faster, so it speeds up what we thought was a long time we had ahead of us, and so it's about the relationship between a beekeeper who is known as the last beekeeper because he's like the world's most famous last thriving beekeeper, and his daughter. And so it's about the relationship between the father and the daughter that's deteriorating as the bees die. So I'm very excited. I'm writing it right now.
Your human story, tying it all in together. That's awesome.
And I'm very excited because I love beekeeping, like just the smells and the vibrations and the textures of it. Where Night Song is really a story about the woods and mountains and forests. This one is about connection to the land and bees, all the sensory details you can think of with bees. So you can look for that one in 2023.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to have you back. Clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can talk bees next
We'll
time.
talk about Xanadu again.
Oh my gosh. Yes. We'll put it on in the background and we can wear our roller skates. It'll be great.
Put on some leg warmers.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And those little skinny Olivia Newton-John headbands we all used to wear. This is going to be great. I'll put it on my
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, boy, I'm having a massive flashback right now.
That is fun to talk about. Yeah, my kids don't appreciate my Xanadu phase, but
no.
There it is.
Oh, that's hilarious. Wow. It has just been beyond delightful to talk to you. So I definitely want to stay in touch. And your book is, that's my next read.
Excellent.
I am in. I'm just sorry that I didn't get to read it before we talked because this kind of came up quicker than.
Yes. Well, I was careful to put no spoilers in our conversation, but hopefully it whet your appetite. So you'll understand the context of it when you read it. The backdrop of the story is my farm. It's my land, my home. So when you're reading it, you can put me in for the main character because between you and me, that she's me. The main character is kind of me.
I had a feeling.
Yeah.
That is so amazing. Wow. Oh, thank you for the inspiration. You got me just wanting to keep going and thinking about like what's next, and thinking it's not about the corn. It just isn't. Love it.
Yeah.
Love that thought.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to be thinking about that now. It's not about the corn. It's about the moose tracks.
It's the weirdest things catch my ear.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Me too. I love that.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for having me. This has been such a fun conversation and I can't wait till we talk again.
Me neither. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. So, getting back to your crazy idea, that secret you might be keeping. Do you have an idea that you've been setting aside because it's impractical? Are you kidding me? That's the story of my life. I'm an idea girl. I get them all the time. Most of the time, I let those crazy ideas fall to the wayside, but every now and then, one of them gets a hold of me and won't let go. Kind of like a certain podcast I know of. Do yourself a favor. Take some time to research what it might take to turn your crazy idea into a reality. Try it on. Take a class, try it out. It's not about whether or not you succeed, really. It's about who you'll become in the exploration of that idea. It's about who you'll become in the effort to make it happen. If you want to know more about Julie, I'll have that information for you in the show notes, along with some of the other things that we talked about. You can just go to latebloomerliving.com/podcast and click on the show notes for episode 55. And of course, while you're there, you can also find a link to the sign-up sheet for your free guide, 5 Steps to Your Midlife Reboot. Let's shake things up, my friend. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a fantastic week. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.